It all began with a search, not for luxury, but for a place to belong. Malik Thomas had saved every spare dollar for months after landing his first stable job as a junior architect. The city was bustling, alive with opportunity, and he wanted a home close enough to the office so he could finally stop commuting for hours every day. He wasn't asking for much, just a modest one-bedroom, somewhere safe, quiet, and decent. He thought he had found it when he came across a charming building in an older part of town. The listing promised a beautiful, newly renovated apartment with classic character and modern charm. The photos showed bright windows, gleaming hardwood floors, and a little balcony that overlooked a park. It looked perfect, maybe even too perfect. Malik arrived for his appointment a few minutes early, neatly dressed, papers in hand, proof of income identification, and references. He stood outside the building, gazing up at its brick facade, feeling the kind of pride that only comes when dreams start to look real. But that feeling didn't last long. The moment the landlord, Richard Langford, saw him, something in his expression changed. It was subtle but unmistakable. The brief tightening of the jaw, the faint frown, the kind of look Malik had seen too many times before. Still, he pushed the thought aside. He told himself he was imagining it. He was here for business, not judgment. Inside, the apartment was even better than the photos. Sunlight poured in through wide windows, the smell of new paint lingered in the air, and the place felt alive with possibility. Malik could already picture himself there. The framed photos on the wall, the small desk by the window where he could work late on designs, maybe even hosting his mom for dinner one weekend. But as the tour went on, the landlord grew colder. His tone changed, his words clipped, his gaze dismissive. He began asking questions that had nothing to do with renting an apartment, questions that made Malik's stomach tighten. Where was he from originally? What kind of crowd did he plan to have over? Did he play loud music? Then the rejection came. Not through honesty, but through excuses. The landlord claimed the apartment had just been taken, even though Malik had confirmed it was still available that very morning. When Malik offered to pay a deposit immediately, Richard cut him off, saying he didn't think it was a good fit. Malik left the building that day with a heavy heart. He walked through the streets as dusk began to settle, his briefcase feeling heavier with each step. He tried to shake off the sting of humiliation, but it lingered. It wasn't just about the apartment. It was about what the rejection represented. A reminder that no matter how professional, polite, or qualified he was, some people would only ever see him as less. The next few weeks were grueling. Every rental agent he called seemed polite until he showed up in person. He started noticing a pattern. The way their smiles faded once they saw the color of his skin, the way their tone shifted from welcoming to wary. His applications were lost, or pending, or already taken. Eventually, Malik found a small studio on the far side of town. It was old, cramped, and far from work, but the landlord didn't ask him where he was from or what kind of people visited him. It was imperfect, but it was his. For months, he poured himself into his work, channeling his frustration into productivity. His designs began to gain attention. His supervisor praised his vision and work ethic. Slowly, his life began to change. He earned promotions. His salary increased, and for the first time, he felt like he was building something no one could take away. But the memory of that apartment, the one he wasn't, good fit, for, never left him. Every time he passed through that neighborhood, he felt it again. The quiet humiliation, the sting of dismissal. It burned deep inside, not as bitterness, but as fuel. Years later, Malik's career reached heights he could barely have imagined back then. He had started his own firm, specializing in urban redevelopment, transforming neglected neighborhoods into thriving communities. Investors trusted him, clients sought him out, and his name began to carry weight in the city's real estate circles. But fate, as it often does, had plans for a full circle moment. One afternoon, Malik was reviewing a list of potential properties for acquisition. His firm had been approached to redevelop a cluster of aging buildings into modern mixed-use spaces, housing, retail, and offices combined. As he skimmed through the addresses, one particular name caught his eye: Langford Properties. Something about it stirred an old memory, the name, the style of the buildings. And then it hit him, the same brick facade, the same location, the same landlord. It was the very building that had rejected him all those years ago. As he stared at the file, a strange mix of emotions surged within him: Disbelief, anger, vindication, and something else he couldn't name. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was destiny placing an opportunity in his hands. The company that once denied him a place to live was now desperate to sell. The owner, Richard Landlord, was facing bankruptcy after years of neglect and bad management. Malik's firm was one of 3 potential buyers, and they were offering the best deal. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across his face. The same man who once told him he wasn't a good fit would soon be negotiating for Malik's approval. And for the first time, Malik didn't just see a building. He saw the chance for poetic justice. But he also saw a choice, one that would define what kind of man he truly was. As he closed the file and looked out the window of his high-rise office, the city stretched out before him, alive with stories of struggle and triumph. His past was coming back, not to haunt him but to test him. And deep down, Malik knew this was only the beginning. Malik Thomas had always believed that success was the best form of revenge. But now, standing at the crossroads between his past and his present, he realized that success alone wasn't enough. This was something deeper. This was destiny offering him a choice, not to destroy someone but to rise above them. He spent that night thinking about the building, the red brick walls, the way Richard Landlord had looked at him, not as a potential tenant, but as an unwelcome presence. That same building, once a symbol of exclusion, was now a crumbling property begging for rescue. Malik's firm could easily buy it, redevelop it, and turn it into something remarkable. But for Malik, this deal wasn't just another business transaction. It was personal. The next morning, his assistant placed a thick folder on his desk. The financial breakdown of Landlord properties. The numbers told a story of decline. Years of neglect had left the building in disrepair. Several tenants had moved out due to maintenance issues, and Richard had taken multiple loans to stay afloat. Malik's firm's offer, though fair, would essentially wipe out the last of his control. For a brief moment, Malik hesitated. Part of him wondered if it was petty to pursue the acquisition. But another part remembered every moment of humiliation. Not just his own, but that of others who faced similar prejudice every day. Buying this building wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation. Later that week, the first meeting was scheduled. It would be a negotiation between Malik's firm and Richard Landlord himself. When Malik's secretary mentioned the name, her tone carried no significance. But for Malik, the name hung heavy in the air. The day of the meeting arrived. Malik entered the downtown office where the negotiations were set to take place. He wore a tailored navy suit, his posture calm and commanding. His team flanked him. Attorneys, analysts, project managers, professionals who respected him, trusted him, and knew nothing of the silent history that connected him to the man they were about to meet. And then the door opened. Richard Landlord walked in. The years had not been kind to him. His hair was thinner, his face worn from stress, and the arrogance that once gleamed in his eyes was replaced by a wary kind of desperation. He greeted the room with forced politeness, but when his eyes met Malik's, he froze. For a split second, recognition flashed across his face, followed by disbelief, then discomfort. Malik offered a professional nod, his face unreadable. He wasn't there to humiliate, he was there to lead. The meeting began with formalities. Malik's voice was calm and steady as he outlined the terms. Fair market value, flexible transition, and guaranteed employment for remaining staff. His tone was measured, controlled, and confident, everything Richard once assumed he couldn't be. Richard struggled to maintain composure. He stumbled through numbers, contradicted his own statements, and grew visibly nervous. Every time he looked at Malik, he seemed to see the past staring back, a reminder of his own arrogance. When the meeting ended, Richard excused himself abruptly, mumbling something about reviewing the offer. Malik didn't stop him. He simply gathered his papers and left the room with quiet authority. Later that evening, Malik sat in his office, staring out at the city lights. He thought about how strange life could be, how power could shift so completely without a single act of revenge. He didn't need to raise his voice or remind Richard of the past. His success spoke louder than any words could, but the process wasn't over. Over the next several weeks, negotiations continued. Richard's finances grew worse. Every delay only made the inevitable more certain. His pride was the only thing keeping him from signing the papers. Then one afternoon, Malik's legal team informed him that Richard had finally agreed to the terms. The deal was official. Landlord Properties, including the very building that had once rejected Malik, was now under his ownership. When the final documents were signed, Malik felt an overwhelming rush of emotion, not triumph but reflection. He thought about the boy he had been, standing on that front porch, hearing the words, "Not a good fit." Now, that same porch belonged to him. The renovation plans began immediately. Malik's vision for the building was clear: to transform it into affordable, high-quality housing for working-class families, people who often faced the same kind of discrimination he once endured. His team worked tirelessly. The old bricks were cleaned, new windows installed, and the faded sign out front was replaced with a new one. The Landlord Residences, redeveloped by Malik Thomas Group. The name wasn't meant as mockery. It was a reminder of what change looked like. A new beginning, built on old mistakes. The grand reopening drew attention from local media. Reporters praised the project for revitalizing a decaying neighborhood, but none of them knew the story behind it. The story of how one man's prejudice had planted the seed for another's success. A few weeks later, Malik visited the property quietly, walking through the halls that once shut him out. The smell of fresh paint filled the air, and laughter echoed from the newly rented apartments. Children ran down the hallways, their joy bouncing off the walls. He paused outside one of the corner units, the very apartment he had toured years ago. It was now home to a young mother and her son. She waved at him through the open door, grateful for the opportunity to live there. Malik smiled and nodded, feeling something deep and powerful stir inside him. Pride, not in revenge, but in transformation. But fate, as always, had another twist waiting. Just as Malik was leaving the building, his property manager approached with a new rental application. One of the commercial units on the ground floor had been vacant, and a prospective tenant had just applied. Malik took the file, flipping through it casually, until he froze. The name on the application stopped him cold. Richard Landlord, the former landlord, the man who once denied him a home, was now asking to rent space in Malik's building. The universe had completed its circle, and Malik now held all the power. He stared at the papers for a long moment, torn between disbelief and something even deeper, the question of what kind of justice he truly wanted. The decision he made next would determine not just the outcome of this story, but the legacy he would leave behind.